There was once a very old man whose eyes had grown dim and whose ears were dull of hearing. When he sat at the table eating, his knees shook and his hands trembled so that he could hardly hold his spoon. Sometimes he let a little food fall out of the corner of his mouth and it dropped on the tablecloth. This disgusted his son and his son's wife, who scolded the old grandfather and said, "Old grandfather, if you can't be neat and keep from spilling on the tablecloth, you can't eat here with us anymore. You're going to have to go sit behind the stove." The old man said nothing back to this kind of treatment. He simply tried harder to hold his trembling hand still. One day he was trying so hard he dropped his spoon, and the spoon broke a chip out of the nice china dish. The son and the son's wife stood up scolding, and they said, "All right, old grandfather, if you can't be neat and keep from spilling on the tablecloth and breaking the china, you can't eat here with us anymore. You're going to have to go sit behind the stove." So they took him roughly by the shoulders, marched him over behind the stove, set him down there, and gave him a cheap wooden bowl out of which he had to eat, and not even enough of it. Still the old man said nothing back to this kind of treatment. He simply sat alone, his eyes full of tears as he looked at the family at the table, laughing and talking to each other. He was lonely and missed his family. Some days after this, the whole family was out working in the field, and they noticed the little grandson of 4 years was pushing some sticks together in an odd sort of way, and the father said, "What are you doing there, son? What are you making with those sticks?" "Oh, Father, I'm making a little trough for you and Mother to eat out of someday when you're old and shaky and have to sit behind the stove." And the father looked at the mother, and the mother looked at the father, and presently they began to cry. And from that time on, they always let the old grandfather eat at the table with the family, even if he did spill a little of anything.
My granddaddy was a Southern Baptist preacher in North Texas back in the 20s and 30s of the 20th century. And the best thing about being a Baptist preacher is that you get to go out and do visitation on Thursday nights. And he went to visit in one home where the whole family gathered around, and the little children who didn't have television to entertain them kind of formed themselves in a little semicircle in front of Granddaddy while he was talking with the family about what was happening in the church community and what kinds of things they'd missed by not having been able to come to the Sunday service. Well, as he was talking, the mere sound of his voice, and I think Southern Baptist preachers work on that sound of their voice, the mere sound of his voice drew this little girl closer and closer to him until she was right up next to him. And so he picked her up and sat her on his knee, which is what granddaddies do all around the world. And she had her thumb in her mouth, and in her other hand she was clutching this little stuffed toy that looked like it had been made by one of the parents 2 or 3 generations before. It probably had those eyes that rattle like you get at J.C. Penney, but they were long since gone, had been replaced by 2 buttons that were sewn on just a little bit too close. And Granddaddy, to be friendly, said, "That's a nice bear. What's his name?" And the little girl took her thumb out of her mouth and said, "Gladly." And Granddaddy thought that was a strange name for a bear, but he certainly wasn't going to say that. He said, "That's a very nice name. Where'd you get that name?" She said, "I name him after that song we sing in church every Sunday." Well, Granddaddy couldn't recollect any songs that seemed to fit that, so he had to ask, "Well, darling, what song is that?" And she said, "Gladly, the Cross-Eyed Bear."
I'm very much engaged in storytelling in the classroom. And I had this particular experience one day. We had an honors assembly. And what happened was, during this honors assembly, students were being honored for their involvement in school. You know, if you had been in the choir, if you'd been a straight A student, whatever you'd done, there were rounds of applause. But there was a group of students on the back row who were never involved in anything. They'd never gotten a C, let alone an A. They'd never been involved in track, they'd never been involved in playing baseball, nothing. They were the outsiders of the group. But every time a group was honored, they stood up. And so in a sense, they were in a very real way mocking what was going on. And I got very angry about that. And no one was doing anything about that. And I felt that it needed to be addressed. And so the teacher in me wanted to, as we say in Great Britain, tear a strip off someone. You want to give them a piece of your mind. In the time it took for me to walk with my class back to the classroom, thank God the storyteller took over. And I told the story to all the kids in my class. One day, there was a farmer. He was on vacation and he was mountaineering. And he saw an eagle's nest. An egg rolled out of the nest and he found it on the ground. And he knew if he didn't keep it warm, the eagle inside would die. So he put it inside his jacket. And when he got home, he put it underneath a chicken. Well, in due time, that chicken hatched. The eagle looked around. It saw all the other chickens pecking and scratching. So it thought, I must be a chicken. And it too began to peck and scratch. But every now and then, an eagle would fly over, and his heart would simply yearn to fly with them. But he was a chicken. So he pecked and he scratched. And the years passed, and he continued to peck and scratch. But still, when those eagles flew over, he would yearn to fly with them. But he was a chicken, and so he continued to peck and scratch. And he pecked and scratched until he died. And he died believing he was a chicken. And I looked at all the children in that class, and I said, you know what? You are all eagles. The only problem is sometimes you behave as if you were chickens. And in the silence that followed, 2 seconds of silence, and then the bell rang. And the kids just got up and in silence walked out. And I think, to me, to be able to say to children, you're all eagles. Those children standing at the back are eagles.
The Walking Club. The Walking Club was formed soon after Mandy adopted me. Mandy's a little black cat with the biggest golden eyes. And she appeared at my doorstep one evening late in October. She stated she had come to live with me. Well, I disagreed with this and tried to show her the advantages of living over in the next neighborhood or perhaps in the woods beyond the park. But she would hear none of this. She walked straight away into my home and into my heart. Up until this time, Lady Dog and I were used to taking long daily walks. When Mandy decided to join us, we had a big discussion and decided to call ourselves an official walking club. In the spring, 2 grackles became our first flying members of the walking club. I thought Mandy was doing this for the obvious benefits of health and exercise, but I was wrong. She was looking over the real estate. The next December, on a cold, snowy morning, we were about a mile from home when Mandy did something different. She turned and ran up the road, across a yard, and through the trees. Well, this didn't worry me. Being a very smart cat, I was sure she'd be back home before I was. But I was wrong. When I got home, there was no Mandy cat. And days of searching brought nothing. And I grieved for my loss. About 2 weeks later, an elderly friend down the street called to tell me something. She said, I think that little black cat, you know, the one you've been missing, I do believe she's living over at the Olays across the street. Well, Lady Dog and I sped down the hill to check on this sighting, and sure enough, there was Mandy. The Olays had a familiar story to tell. This little black cat had appeared on their doorstep, said she was a stray. The Olays were delighted. The week before, their kitty of many years had died, and they saw Mandy as a Christmas gift from heaven. All attempts to take Mandy back home and reclaim her were futile. She was a free spirit, and I felt I could not make her a prisoner. So sadly, I gathered together her medical records, I wrapped her Christmas gift, and signed the card, "Love from your ex," and sent it down the hill. Mandy has not forgotten us. She waits on her new porch in the mornings. When Lady Dog, the Grackles, and I appear, she takes 3 graceful leaps and rejoins us as a founding member of the walking club.
I want to tell you a story that's a folk tale from Russia. A long time ago, before your time, before my time, there were 2 mountains in Russia. And in between the 2 mountains, there was a river. And across the river, there was a narrow bridge. Now, on the first mountain, there lived a goat, way up high in the rocks. And every once in a while, that goat would come down because on the side of the river, there was a wonderful meadow with lush green grass. And the goat would eat that grass. But on the other side of the river, at the foot of the other mountain, there was another pasture with green, lush grass. And so that goat would walk across that narrow bridge and eat over on this field, and then go back to his own mountain. On the second mountain, there was also a goat that lived high up in the rocks. And on an occasional day, he would come down and graze on his side of the river and go across the bridge and graze in the other field on the first mountain, and then go back again and up to his rocks. Well, one day, both of those goats came down at the same time from their mountains. They grazed on their sides of the river, and then both of them started across the bridge, that narrow bridge, at the same time. And they met in the middle, and they looked at each other. And the first goat said, "Back up, so I can get across." And the second goat said, "Me back up? I started here first, you back up." Well, they argued back and forth, and they were practically nose to nose by then. And finally, they got so angry at each other that they locked their horns together, and they began to push and shove. But you know, they were just about the same size and the same strength, and neither one of them could push the other one off. What they did do was knock each other off the bridge into the water. Now, if you had been there, and if you had listened very carefully as they came up out of the water, shaking themselves, you would have heard each one of them saying, "This never would have happened if he hadn't been so stubborn." 2 goats on the bridge.
In my travels, I did find an old man who told me that juggling has its own history and its own philosophy and its own stories and myths. He told me this story. He said, in the very beginning of time, in the very center of the universe, there was a chicken's egg. And when the chicken's egg broke, there was a man in the middle of the chicken's egg. But the man had nothing to do. So the man reached out and created something. And he liked something very much. So he took something and he threw it up in the air. And then he took his hands out and created many somethings. And he threw the things up in the air like this. And he made planets. And he made moons to go around the planets. And then that first being, he bounced one of those things on his head and he saw the stars. And so the entire universe, says the juggling myth, was created by the first juggler from the chicken egg in the center of space.
Howdy. I tell stories about southeast Nebraska. Now, there's lots of folks out there that say nothing ever happened in southeast Nebraska. Well, sir, I'm here to tell you that every person, every rock, tree, village, city has a story to tell. And I'm here to tell you one of them. About the town of Julian. Now, most towns is named after a fella's last name, but Julian was named after Julian nobody could pronounce his last name, so they just called it Julian. Well, sir, old man Julian was a miser, lived in a shacky type house on the edge of town. They say he had tons of money. Well, sir, one night, about the turn of the last century it was, a robber broke into his house, took all his money, and killed old man Julian dead. And they say, from that time on, the ghost of old man Julian used to walk the streets of that small Nebraska town. Until about 1910 it was, when a fella out in California on his deathbed confessed to the murder of old man Julian. Only trouble was that fella didn't die. He got extradited back to the state of Nebraska, spent the rest of his life up in the penal colony. And they say, from that time on, the ghost of old man Julian disappeared from the streets of that small Nebraska town, but was seen walking the walls of the state penitentiary. Yes, sir.
There once was a couple who lived with their only son, Conrad, in a modest cottage at the edge of a great forest. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable and they were happy being together. One day, the man's father had to come live with them. The old grandfather's eyes had grown dim, ears nearly deaf, and his hands trembled like leaves in the wind. Whenever he ate, he was unable to hold the food on his spoon. It would spill off into the tablecloth and down to the floor. And often the food would run out of his mouth and soil his clothes. For months, the couple discussed the disgusting behavior of the old man. Then finally, they decided to set his own table in a corner of the kitchen. And when the old grandfather ate, he looked sadly at his family. And he sat there. And whenever he spilled his food, he would sob. One day his hands were trembling so bad, he dropped the glass bowl, and immediately the woman scolded him, and she went to market to buy a wooden bowl for the grandfather. And as days passed, he sat sadly in the corner, eating all alone out of his wooden bowl. Late in the fall, the father came home from work after a hard day, and he saw Conrad sitting in the middle of the floor, carving from a huge block of wood. "What are you making, son?" asked the father. "Oh, it's a present for you and Mommy. I'm making you wooden bowls so you'll have something to eat out of when you come to live with me in your old age." The husband and wife looked at each other for a long time, and then they began to weep. That evening, they moved the old grandfather back to the family table, and from that day on, he always ate with them, and no one said anything when he spilled his food.
This story is called Why the Sky is Far Away. It's a Nigerian folk tale. In the beginning, the sky was very close to the earth. People didn't have to harvest food or go fishing or cook rice to eat. All they had to do was grab a piece of the sky and eat it. Sometimes it tasted like meat stew, sometimes it tasted like corn on the cob, and sometimes it tasted like sweet pineapple. Because there was no work to be done, the people spent their days weaving rugs, carving sculptures, playing music, and telling stories. Well, things went on like this for many, many years until the people got careless. They would take a piece of the sky and they'd take 1 or 2 or maybe 3 bites, and then they'd throw it over their shoulder into a heap of garbage. The land became covered with heaps of garbage of the sky. The sky god looked down and he saw all of this garbage, and he got very angry. He turned all of his clouds black, and he thundered, and he spoke to the people. "You are not respecting the gifts that I give to you. You need not to throw all of the sky away. If I see anyone else throw a piece of the sky into a garbage heap, you may lose those gifts." Well, the people got frightened, and they became careful. They thought before they took a piece of the sky, "Am I nervous or hungry? Am I bored or really hungry?" And then when they did take a piece of the sky, they would only take a little piece. And then they'd eat it, and if they were still hungry, they'd take another little piece. Well, in this town was a man named Alese, and Alese was greedy, and he was accustomed to getting whatever he wanted. So one day, he went out and he took a huge piece of the sky. It was big enough to feed 40 people. He took 3, maybe 5 bites, and then he was full, and he couldn't eat any more. He tried to get some other people to eat the sky, but they wouldn't. They could take a few bites, and then they were full. He said, "Oh, what's one more piece of the sky in the garbage heap?" And he took it to the garbage heap, and he buried it. But the sky god saw what he did. And the sky thundered and was filled with lightning, but no rain. And the sky moved away from the earth. And all of the people, when they saw this, they jumped up and they tried to grab the sky. And they got ladders and they tried to go up, but they couldn't. They cried to the sky, "Sky, how will we feed ourselves?" And the sky said, "You must learn to work. You must harvest your own food. Maybe you will learn not to waste nature's gifts from your own labor." And so they began to work. Some of them planted beans. Some of them planted carrots. Others planted wheat and harvested that. Others became fishermen. And those who did not have an inclination or a talent for raising food became other things. They became teachers, storytellers, weavers, tailors. And from that day to this, people have had to work.
The story that I want to tell is an old folk tale. And I've heard it told by different storytellers and by ministers and even members of my own family. It's the story of the mule, and some folks call it the jealous farmer. But one day, way back before you were born and me, there were 2 men that were farmers, and they just happened to be neighbors. One was Farmer Jones. Now, Farmer Jones was a good man, kind man, always looked out for everybody's interest, and he had a wonderful heart. But his neighbor, Farmer Smith, woo, that man was mean, ornery, jealous. Now, some folks said he was jealous of his neighbor's house, jealous of his neighbor's barn, of his crops, even of the man's wife. But I'm not here to gossip. I'm just going to tell a story. He was also jealous of a mule. It was just a regular work mule on the farm. Now, one night, that man, he got up at 2 o'clock in the morning, went outside, and he started digging a hole. He dug and he dug and he dug and he dug. He dug and he dug and he dug and he dug. He dug a hole that was 6 feet deep, 4 feet wide. And then he went inside and he got himself a big old sack, filled it up with oats. And then he started sprinkling those oats all around that hole, poured some down in the middle of the hole, and went from his property all the way over to the neighbor's barn door. Well, the mule was behind that door. He pushed the door open just a little bit, and that mule could smell them oats. Now, what you think he do? He was hungry, took his body, and he pushed until that door just slid wide open. That mule came out. He commenced to eating them oats. Oh, he was a-eating and a-eating and a-eating. Eating and a-eating and a-eating. He ate all around that hole and then fell plumb down in the middle of the hole. The farmer looked at that mule and he said, "I got you now. I sure got you now." He took the shovel, put dirt back on it, and he started filling the hole back up. Now, some of y'all probably thinking he's burying that mule alive, right? Well, I told you he was mean and ornery, no count. That man threw that dirt as fast as he could, but every time the dirt hit the mule back, you know what the mule did? He would shake it off, stomp it down, and then rise to the next level. Now, what did he do, y'all? Now, see, Big Mama said this was call and response, so I want you to say it along with me or echo it, all right? He would shake it off, stomp it down, and then rise to the next level. Pretty soon, he was throwing the dirt so fast, shovel had sparks flying off of it. But that mule, when that dirt hit his back, he would just shake it off, stomp it down, and then rise to the next level. Pretty soon, he was standing at pure flat level ground. He looked at that farmer, and the look he had in his eye, he looked like he was ready to drop kick him into
yesterday. He took off a running down that road like lightning. Big Mama say he's still running to this very day. Now, some of the folk tell this story because life throws dirt on our back and we forget how to deal with it. We need to learn how to shake it off, stomp it down, and rise to the next level. Now, sometimes that dirt is discrimination. Sometimes it's ageism. Sometimes people can't even hear your ideals or recognize your contributions. Sometimes they're singling you out because you're blonde hair, blue eyes. Sometimes because you're male and black and 25. But you got to know how to shake it off, stomp it down, and rise to the next level. That dirt, it's on the outside, but sometimes it can affect you on the inside. Change your way of thinking, how you feel about yourself. So you got to remember who you are, where you come from, and be willing to stand up and to fight for what's right. And when you do that, you'll be able to shake it off, stomp it down, and rise to the highest level that you can. That's the end of that story.
You see, a long time ago, there was a family of mice. There was Mamá Ratón, Papá Ratón, Hermano Ratón, y Hermana Ratón. There was Mama Mouse, Papa Mouse, Brother Mouse, Sister Mouse, and Baby Ratón, little baby mouse. And they went on a picnic. When they were done eating, the brother and sister said, Mamá, Papá, vamos a jugar. And Mamá and Papá said, okay, but don't play too close to that fence, because on the other side of the fence lives El Gato. The brother and sister said, okay, Mama, okay, Papa. Of course, they went right to the fence. They looked through the little slats, and sure enough, there was the cat. Huge green eyes, long whiskers, a tail that flopped in the grass. The brother said, Hermana, ¿es un gato? The sister said, Sí, hermano, es un gato. The brother said, Hola, gato. The cat didn't say anything. The sister said, Hola, gato. The cat didn't move a whisker. The brother said, Hola, gato feo. The cat started to laugh. She thought that was so funny. The mice started to laugh. I messed up. Woo! They started to laugh. They were making fun of that cat so much they didn't see the cat's eyes getting a little smaller. They were making fun of that cat so much they didn't see her tail start to flick faster in the grass. They were making fun of that cat so much they didn't see her jump to the top of the fence until it was almost too late. They said, oh, adios, gato. They turned around. They went running as fast as they could. The cat got closer and closer. They said, Mama, Papa. The cat got closer and closer. They said, Mama. They finally got to their parents. They said, El gato va a comernos. Come on, let's go, let's go. Papa said, El gato? Yo no tengo miedo del gato. Yo voy a decirle que yo soy Papá Ratón y yo voy a darle pau, 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 pau. And the brother and sister said, okay. And just then the cat came jumping over a little bush and Papa said, Mama. He went jumping behind Mama. Brother and sister went behind Mama too. The only thing that stood between that mean cat and her family was Mama. Her heart was going like this. She didn't know what to do. But with the courage a mother feels when her family is threatened, she stood on her hind paws, looked right into the great green eyes of that cat, and from deep inside of her she said, boo, boo, boo. The cat stopped. The cat thought maybe Mama had called all the dogs in the neighborhood. So the cat turned around, jumped over the fence, and was gone. Mama couldn't believe it worked. She got her family home nice and safe, and she said, you see, kids, it pays to speak another language. It's true of me and true of you as well.
So there was a wonderful old man and his wife that came to Silver Dollar City for years. His name was Wilford Hames. And I almost can't tell this story without the memory of him making me sound more and more like Wilford. But he said, I was born and raised up yonder in Webster County. He said, down on the Douglas County line, there at the south side of Webster County, there was this little town by the name of Smackout. I wouldn't make that up. I've talked to people who was raised in Smackout. There was hardly anything left there by the time I got the story except a handful of houses. And he said when he was a boy, there was a general store run by two elderly ladies, which is where the name of the town come from. Because the two ladies hardly have kept more than a wheelbarrow load of groceries there in the store, and you go in and try to buy something, they look around and say, no, we're just Smack Out. Anyway, he said there was this bunch of crooks up in the hills, and they got their hands on one of those big, rackety, you got to kick them to make them go printing presses. One of those that'll pinch your fingers if you don't get them out of the way quick enough. And they got to print up counterfeit. I'm talking phony money. And they got carried away one day, and they printed them up a whole bushel basket full of $15 bills. And then they got to worrying about it. They said, Lord, ain't nobody going to be dumb enough to take no $15 bill. What are we going to do with these things? But this one feller who thought he was smarter than the rest of them said, no, you boys ain't thinking. He said, I know what to do. He said, give me some of them things. This hillbillies runs these little businesses down there in the hills. They ain't got no better sense. Give them to me. I'll pass them. Well, they gave him some. He rushed right to smack out, walked into the general store, went back to the candy counter, and he shoveled him up a little bit of that candy into one of them little teeny brown paper bags, and he took it up to the old woman, and she weighed it up, and she said, that'll be 30 cents, please. He handed her a $15 bill. Sure enough, she didn't bat an eye. She took that 15 and she punched 30 cents on the cash register, went pa-ching, and the little 30 jumped up in the window, and she grabbed the cranked it 4 or 5 times, and the thing went ka-ching, came out and hit her in the belly. She gave him change. She gave him 2 $7 bills and 2 35-cent pieces. There is justice left in the world yet.
The debate in sign language. As the king of this land, I have decided to throw the Jews out. How I will do this, you might ask? I will have a debate with one of them in sign language. I called all the people together, the Jewish community. I told them, I will give you 3 signs. And if you get all 3 signs right, then you and your people may remain in this land. Otherwise, you will all have to leave.
Needless to say, the Jews did not know what to do. After all, discussions we had plenty of, arguments we had plenty of, but volunteers we had none of. Who wants to debate a king, let alone debate a king in sign language? Finally, after going back and forth and back, one person, Yankel the chicken man, me, I raised my hand. After all, someone's got to do it, so off I went to debate the king.
Yankel? The chicken man?
The king.
Are you ready for the first sign?
Aye.
That's correct. Amazing. The second sign. Right again. If you do not get this last sign correct, all of your people must go. He'll never get this one. A piece of cheese.
It's
correct. An egg. Well, that night, all the people of my court gathered around and asked, what was that debate about? I told them I couldn't believe the Jews sent that little chicken man, Yankel, and he could read my signs. I started off by showing them with my fingers spread that the Jews were all across the world, and he showed me with his fist that they were one in the hand of God. I showed with my 2 fingers that there were 2 kings, the one in heaven and the one on earth. And he showed me with his 1 finger that there was one king, the king in heaven. I showed him by that piece of cheese that their religion had grown old and moldy. And he showed me with his egg that it was fresh and whole. It was amazing.
Meanwhile, all the Jews crowded into my store to find out the details. I said to them, you call this a debate? I mean, the king, he puts out a hand to grab me, so what do? I put up a fist to show him if he lays a finger on me, I'll give him such a punch. Then the king, he puts up 2 fingers like he's going to poke out my eyes, so what do? I put up 1 finger to block him. Well, the king knows he's dealing with someone who will stand up to him, so what does he do? He takes out his lunch. So what do? I take out mine.
A man and his wife go into the forest to deliver or to collect palm nuts. The man goes into a tree and he begins to collect palm nuts. He's bothered by a bee. The bee begins to buzz around his head. He's bothered by the bee. He drops the knife. He calls to his wife to duck. His wife ducks and the knife falls into a small mouse hole. The mouse jumps out of the hole into a tree where he frightens a monkey who is eating a piece of mango fruit. The monkey drops the mango fruit on the back of an elephant who thinks he has been shot and begins to run. As he is running through the forest, his tail topples a tall ant hill. The ant hill falls and breaks the bushfowl on the bushfowl's nest, breaks her eggs, and the bushfowl is so sorrowful she does not cackle at dawn to wake the sun. The earth is dark for 3 days. The Great Spirit arrives and demands to know why and what has happened. Well, the bushfowl blames the ants blame the elephant blames the monkey blames the mouse blames the hunter blames the bee. The Great Spirit declares that the bee comes forward. The bee comes forward and the Great Spirit questions him, why have you bothered the hunter? The bee says, bzz, 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 bzz. And he questions him again. He says, bzz, 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 bzz. He questions him again. And the bee replies, bzz, 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 bzz. The Great Spirit declares that henceforth bees will only be able to respond by buzzing. And it is so today.